Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Heather Solomon, host of Listen Up Younger Self, a podcast where she turns her own hindsight into powerful tools for others. She uses her experience as well as her past mistakes to help people avoid the same pitfalls and make choices that truly serve their happiness. Welcome to the show, Heather.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. Good morning.
Good morning, good morning, good evening from India, and good
Yes.
morning. So it's the two worlds meeting. Welcome to the show, Heather. Welcome to India in this online form, and I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about how one can rewrite their story, whatever their past is or past
Yeah.
mistakes are. In that backdrop, we'll have our conversation. But before that, let's learn a bit about your journey, your background, Heather, so that the audience learns who they are listening to.
Okay. So I live in Iowa in the United States. I am very happily married, and that is by choice, not by luck. I have two children, and I have a 31-year-old son who's happily married, and I have a 24-year-old daughter. And I didn't grow up that way. I come from a single parent home. My mom worked really hard to give us a very good life, but she struggled and we moved a lot. And I didn't have a father figure in my life, and I didn't have any masculine energy around me at all. And growing up, I had a lot of limiting beliefs about what my future would actually look like. And I didn't do well in high school. I actually graduated with a 1.86 GPA, which is very low, which is just scooting by. And I know that it had a lot to do with what I felt about myself. And so when I left high school, I had a couple choices, essentially working in a canning factory or going into the military. So I went into the military because I'd never traveled. I wanted to go do it. And I just knew that steel-toed boots were in my future no matter what. And so I went, and when I got out, I met my husband. And I remember he was in school to be a physician. And I just thought that there was no way someone like this could love someone like me. And I had to really get my stuff together to become a better person, to become a version of myself I knew I could be. And so I have always looked at life not so much of what I want, but more so of what I don't want. And I didn't want to not be happy. I didn't want to move over and over and over again with my kids. I didn't want my children to grow up in a single parent home. And I didn't want to look at someone and think, you have to make me happy. I wanted to know that I came from here first. And then that person just complimented it. And so I had to do a lot of work. And at the ripe old age of 22, 23, I was listening to talk show radios when it wasn't even a thing, because I'm 53 now. So 30 years ago, I was listening to talk show radios, Dr. Laura Schlesinger, who I give major props to, about how to be a good wife, how to be a better mother. And I realized that I needed to choose happiness over being right. And I have really lived, not always successfully, but I have lived a major part of my life with that theory in mind.
Where did you get all this wisdom from, Heather?
Honestly, I just wanted more out of my life, and I knew how not to get it. I knew how not to get it by making some of the same mistakes that other people had made that I had seen. And I'm not just talking about my mom. I had seen over and over and over again how people put themselves first, put their happiness first, depended on other people for happiness, how people showed up. And I knew that I needed to show up different to have the life that I wanted to have. And I also knew that my children's idea of marriage was 100% dependent upon me. They could look at it as something that was negative. They could look at it as something that people coexist. They could look at it as something that they definitely never wanted to do. Or they could look at it as this massive, beautiful love affair and something that they truly wanted and knew how to get. And that was the choice I decided to make. Now, trust me, it didn't happen at 23 and 24. It took a lot of trial and error. It took me a lot of growth, a lot of mistakes, a lot of getting out of my own way in order for me to learn how to be the best version. And when you are that best version, people naturally are that best version for you too.
That's a lot of wisdom, lots of good things. Very few guests have been able to talk about life, about relationships, about seeing life the way you have described in the just a few minutes, And
Yeah.
and that is where I want to understand. You talk about your earlier version. What was your earlier version? And what was your new version? How did you move from your earlier version to your new version? How did you know that your earlier version needed some sort of, updation of that software?
You know, it really came down to when I had my son. And, I knew that life wasn't a gimme. And I knew that I needed to create something incredible for him. And he just was this game changer for me. He was this person that I held in my hands and I thought, I have all the control right now. And I get to decide what this looks like. And I did a lot wrong. And I will tell you, there's a 7-year gap between our kids. And within that 7-year gap, I was a better mom for my daughter, the younger, than I was for my son because I was learning as I went. But I knew that I didn't want to put any baggage on them. And I'm sure I did. That's just not possible to not mess up here and there. But I knew that this older version of me was not going to be the person that needed to be the person that they needed me to be, if that makes sense. I just knew I needed to be more. And the only way I knew how to do that was to look at life and go, I don't like that. So how do I figure out how to do it better? And if you actually look behind me, that's just a small version of the books and the audibles that I have read over the years of self-development, of how to become the best version of myself. And, you start to hear it all and you start to hear the same thing over and over and again in a lot of the books. But once in a while, the same thing just hits a chord. And then all of a sudden you're like, that's what I needed. And so even in my marriage and in my parenting, I saw a lot of things that I was doing that I didn't like. And so I knew I was like, oof. And I just had to check myself. I had to just sit back and go, that's not who I'm supposed to be. That's not who my children need me to be. That's not who my husband needs me to be. And I also watched around me at all the marriages that were living a partnership. And that was the last thing I wanted. I really wanted, when I say a magical love affair, that's exactly what I wanted. And I was not going to accept anything less.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Your husband must be watching all these things, your transformation, your own version. From what distance was he watching? Was he saying anything, or he was just simply watching and smiling?
So my husband is very black and white. There's no gray. He's quiet. He has to be because I'm loud. And so I feel like we have to have that balance, right? That yin and the yang in order for us to work. And I even have an episode on my podcast about that, about how it's a really good thing because you can't outstage me. I'm not going to be outstaged, right? So he has watched me grow so much. And I started a business 11 years ago with a network marketing company. And I loved it. And what it did for me was it showed me who I was capable of being. It just lit a fire in me. And I had been working so hard before that to just make sure that I was a good mom and I was a good wife and I wanted to be all of that. But the one thing I was missing in all of it was me. So I was everybody's cheerleader. But then there came a moment where everybody got to be mine. And then they got to see me step up to the plate. And when my husband did, I remember when I started having a lot of success in my business, I remember him saying to me, "You have finally become the woman I have always known you were. You just finally see her." And I remember being like, wow, because it was so impactful for me. And it made me realize I was on the right path and I needed to keep going and I needed to keep going. And he is very proud of me. In fact, we were on vacation recently and my daughter said, "What's the thing that you love about your mom or about mom the most?" Right? And I was like, "Oh, I'm sure it's going to be my eyes or something." And he actually said, "I love how she doesn't stop. I love how she gets after life. I love how she doesn't put limits, you know?" And I was like, that's way better than my eyes, kind of. But it was, I was like, but it made me feel so recognized and so seen for everything I had worked so hard for, because sometimes it does take time away from him. And I had to learn that too, as I was rushing forward on my goals and my journey. And sometimes I needed to take a step back and go like, well, I need to make sure that I am 100% present for him when he needs me to be, especially when we became empty nesters and my vision kept getting bigger. And I'm like, we're going to start a podcast and now I'm going to start a coaching thing. And now I'm going to do this, you know? And so I always have to center myself and make sure that he is the number one thing that comes in my life. And I will tell you, I have always said to my kids, to my friends, whatever, my husband comes first. He comes before my children, because without us, we don't have a family. And so he's incredibly proud of me, and I know that, and that makes it even more fulfilling for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll come to your podcast, Heather, for just two things first. One is about being right and being happy.
Mm.
Help us understand that part from your own experience better.
Absolutely. So I know years ago, I would fight to the death over whether or not it was your turn to take out the trash or mine. And when we get into these moments of being more concerned over who's right and who's wrong, you're missing the bigger picture. And most of the time, it is over the most ridiculous thing. But then it just starts to layer, right? Like all of a sudden it goes from it was your turn to take out the garbage to I didn't like your tone of voice to your mother said this when I was, when we first got married. Like it opens up everything and it starts just dumping the entire kitchen sink out. And the smallest things can escalate into the biggest things. And what I found was that if I was able to go, these things don't matter, but what does matter is that we walk away and we're happy, then I'm happy, right? I don't need to be right. That's my ego talking. I don't need to make sure that I say, you mean like if he comes to a decision about something, I don't need to make sure he knew it was mine first. Because when I do that, I take away his power. And I think too many people do that, even with my kids. If I've told my daughter 1,000 times, you need to make your bed, just a simple example. And then one day she comes up and she goes, you know what, I think it's a good idea if I make my bed every morning. And I'm like, like I've always said, you guys, I take that away from her. I take it away from her immediately. And so I had to learn to just zip it and to just decide what is more important. Now, there are certain things that you're going to go, we need to do this. Like this has to be, I don't always lay down, right? But most of the things in our life aren't worth fighting about. We just get so caught up in our own emotion and we get so caught up in our own ego. And I had to lay that ego to bed a long time ago, or I would never be where I am.
Absolutely. And you talk about ego. What is ego? And you also put it ego versus, happiness again. And why winning isn't always worth it. Help us understand, because people think, they are trying to explain themselves. Sometimes it is not ego. They think they are trying to explain their version, that what their understanding is about. And sometimes that borders onto, you are taking away somebody else's right. That's why I want to understand for the audience.
Well, I wish that what I would say to everyone is say, when you're in that moment, of just, I need you to know that I'm right. I'm going to explain it, and I'm going to explain it, and I'm going to explain it until you hear me. I want you to think, what is my end goal here, right? What is my end goal? Is my end goal to shut you down? Because if you finally go, fine, it's your way, what did I win? I mean, what did I actually win? I just beat you down. That was it. It's not like you're magically thinking, oh my gosh, Heather is so right. I am so wrong. What they're doing is they're not feeling heard, or they're not feeling understood, and they're not feeling like a partnership, right? They're just feeling like somebody's trying to dominate them. And I wish, if that was the biggest question you could ask, is, what do I need to do to end this? Like, and I've said that to my husband. When we get into those, it's like a whirlwind. You're just like going back and forth. And I'll just stop and go, what do we need to do to end this? I don't need to be right. You don't need to be right. Can we just, what needs to happen right now for us to walk away from this happy? And I think that's a super powerful question. And I also think when you're in it, to go, what is my end game? Because if your end game is just to prove that you're so right and they're so wrong, you need to take a look at why you need to be right. What is it in you that is lacking, that is so demanding of their attention? And then you need to figure out how to fix that.
Right. Is it about, male or female, or is it what you speak is for both of the sides?
That is such a good question. And I think this is going to be super unpopular for a lot of people, but it's my opinion. So I will tell you that I think, bear with me here, I think that men are simple creatures. I do. I think they need to be fed. They need to have attention. They need to have all the things, right? Like, but it's very simple. Now, there's very few things men need. They're black and white. If you tell me that I'm going golfing, a woman will think, why, you don't want to be with me? Like, what is it? You're going to go, you'd rather spend time with your friends, right? So women are the difficult ones. Not all, but I would say the majority of the women I've met are the difficult ones. And so what I do think there's a major difference. And when we want men to think our way, it's just exhausting. And what I've had to learn over the years is that if I ask my husband if he's okay and he says yes, I have to take that at face value. If he asks me if I'm okay and I say no, he probably knows that that's not the truth, right? And so there is a major difference between us. And when you can look at your man and think, you are telling me the truth. There's no hidden agenda. You're just doing your thing. And if I can take myself and tone it down a little bit so that I'm not thinking the worst all the time about what he's saying. I'm going golfing. I'm like, oh no, like that used to drive me crazy. I'm like, why are you going golfing? Why don't you want to be with me? We're home on a Friday. You should want to spend your time with me. You know what? He just was going golfing. There was no hidden agenda to it. And so, yeah, there's a major difference between how men and women think. And we definitely overanalyze things to the point where they can become conflicts. So we have to learn how to just take it down, breathe, and go, and ask crucial questions like, is that your intention? No. Okay.
Absolutely. Is there anything that men can do in such situations? Should they not go golfing or go golfing? Sometimes it can be tricky situations around that. Or should they just keep quiet?
Well, so a lot of times in my podcast, I speak from the women's point of view because that's what I know, right? But what I do know is that for men and women, that my husband can calm me by a simple touch. And I think that one of the biggest things that can take a marriage from zero to hero is by purposely, intentionally touching your partner, your spouse every day, several times. Now, I'm not saying smacking on the hiney, nothing like that. If you want to, knock yourself out. But I'm saying more like just a touch. When you walk past them, a touch on the small of their back. There is hormones that are released every time you get touched. And it just brings confidence and calmness to you. And so I feel like that is a major key component most people are missing. And so when my husband feels more connected to me, I don't question him going golfing. Should he stay home? If it's as simple he's going golfing, no, he shouldn't stay home. But he should be also making sure that my needs are met and I have his needs met too, so that it's a common ground. Now, I think it's also very different at different levels of your marriage. We're empty nesters. It doesn't matter if he goes golfing. He can go play 2 rounds. I don't have toddlers at home sitting there and I'm like I need a break too, right? And if you do, that's where you have to have communication come into play and saying, that's great, go, but then I might need like a break when you get home. Or, it's really making sure each other's needs are met so that when one person needs to go golfing, because that's healthy for them to get out and to be with the men and to have their bromance, it's so healthy to do that. And it makes you a better couple. But I think just starting with simple little steps to make sure the other person feels part of you will alleviate a ton of that mess.
Absolutely. When do I know that, it's time to rewrite my story? Our stories, when we are young, it still is unfolding. And many a times we feel that this is right. And we talk about being authentic, being real in today's time.
Yeah.
When do I know I should rewrite it, or the present story is the present version itself is the one which will have to move forward? Is there a trick to know about it?
Well, I think there is. I think there's a couple stages to it. If you get to a point in your life and you can look back at the rest at your previous life and go, and you should take time to analyze it and go, do I like it? Do I want to continue that? Is it what the rest of my story is going to be? And then if you like it, keep going. If you think there can be improvements, improve. If you think I don't want that anymore, rewrite it. And you can do that all the time. And I do think people should sit down every year, every other year, whatever it is, even if you're married or even if you're by yourself, and take a look at what your life looks like and go, is this how I want to have it pan out? Is this what my story is going to be? Because we do have control over it. And I don't think people understand that. I think people think life is given to them and that they have to accept it, and you don't. Now, there's a lot of situations that happen in your life, but it's what you choose to do with that situation that will take you forward. A lot of people have trauma. A lot of people have bad things happen, but people deal with it differently. And so you can go, do I want that to keep defining me, or do I want something different? And so I think, honestly, at any point in your life, you should do some self-checks and decide, is this it? If not, we go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When did the podcast come in? What is your why for the podcast?
So a couple of years ago, I was with a friend of mine who had a podcast. And honestly, she's a realtor. She's amazing. But she was showing me a property and she asked me a question. And it wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first time she had asked me something about marriage. And I've had that happen so many times. But I think it's because I'm very clearly happy. I am very clearly very pro-marriage. And she asked me a question. I don't even recall what it was, but she said, you need to come right now and be on my podcast. And so I did, and I was super nervous, but it was super fun. And she had said, you need your own. You need to do it. And I remember thinking, because, you get those little demons in your head. And I'm like, why would anybody want to hear anything I have to say? And so it took me 2 years. It took me 2 years of not telling, but like conversing with people and and helping people and giving my opinion, whether it was asked for or not. And all of a sudden I realized I have a platform. And so I talked to her again, and I actually went to a conference, a women's conference, and I walked into that women's conference, and it was actually my friend who was the realtor. And on the way in, I was talking to my brother, and I said, I've got to figure this podcast thing out, but I don't know how to do it. I have no idea how to do it. And I went and I sat down at this conference, and the woman sitting next to me, she was a professor that taught podcasting, and she has a coaching business for podcasting. And I was like, if this is not a God thing, if God is not saying, I don't know how else to tell you, but I sat her next to you on purpose. And so we left there, and then she started coaching me, and now she's helping me get into coaching others. And so that's going to be launching here in the next month or so. But she's the one that helped me do it. And she heard my story and my vision for the podcast. And that's how it started. It was just, I wanted it, and then I waited, and then I felt like it was a God moment, and I did it.
How is your experience sharing your views on your podcast about about golfing, as you said, about other things? How is it received, such ideas?
Well, I have had great feedback. I have had amazing feedback. I'm a very straight shooter. I was in the military, so I cuss a little bit. I've got a little bit of a sailor mouth, and so I'm very straight shooter in my podcast, and I tell it how I see it. And I figure you don't have to listen. If I'm not your cup of tea, hit next. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to listen. But I have watched my numbers grow, and I was so humbled, and so just the amount of feedback I got from even people in my own community who were like, oh, I sent this one to my girlfriend because she needs it. Or I sent this one to my husband because we need this together. Or the amount of, when I look at my demographics and I can see like people in Germany and Indonesia, and I'm like, wow, it's so crazy to see that people are listening to what I have to say. And I do think my message is good. I don't think I'm trying to blame anybody for doing anything. What I'm trying to do is get people to step into their greatest self and have their love affair. I want them to be happy. I'm not trying to play the blame game. I literally just want you to know that what you want is just right here. All you need to do is take it. But you have all the power. I think people wait for their spouses to show up, but you have to show up first. And because men are simple, in the best way, they will come along. When I am the best version of me, when I'm happy, you always hear happy wife, happy life, right? It's true. So when I'm happy and I am engaging with him and I'm touching him, he just does it back. And so these are the messages I'm giving on my podcast. I'm not pointing fingers, and had a great turnout. It's been really fun.
Wonderful. Overall, what is it that you want people to take away from your story, from your podcast?
I want people to know that all of the power of the life that they want is within their own grasp, that they don't have to wait for someone else to show up to be the person that they need to be. They don't have to wait to be happy. They have to be happy first. Nobody's going to do that for you. They're going to complement it. So if you want a magical love affair, if you want to be the best version of yourself, if you want to be the most fantastic mom or dad, do it. You just have to put it in your own hands and quit waiting for it to show up. Because the sooner you take control of your life, the more life you have left to be happy.
Wonderful. There is so much to learn from you, Heather, from your life, from your podcast. And I'm sure a lot of people would like to connect with you, learn more about what you do, about your podcast. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, I do have my email, which is listenupyoungerself@gmail.com. I'm on social media at Heather SLMN. I'm on Facebook too, but I will be coming out with a coaching soon. But that's not here yet, but they can find all that information on either my social or they can message me in my email.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining
Thank you.
us.
Thank you so much.